Welcome back, everybody. Let me know if the stream is going okay, because I got this notification that there might be some lag or buffering during the stream. But yeah, sorry that was in the stream last week. Some other work came up, which I kind of have to do, but so it sort of messed up my scheduling a bit, but now it should be back to normal. Let's see. So today I'm working on Voyager stuff, and Voyager is my tabletop RPG setting, which is basically my own original world. So, and I've posted stuff about it on like itch.io and stuff like that. So right now we're playtesting the actual game itself. Some people have been playtesting it, and now I'm sort of fleshing out more of the game system. So those of you who are familiar with the system would know some of the terminology I'm using, but I'm guessing a bunch of you guys are not familiar with it, so I'll do some explaining, at least enough to kind of follow along. Let's see. So Cape Morning, is this D&D RPG? So not quite. So D&D is obviously the most popular tabletop RPG, but this is like a custom system, meaning it like uses its own set of rules and such. So obviously, you know, like games like Pathfinder, Blades in the Dark, all of these are different types of tabletop RPGs, not just Dungeons and Dragons that uses different types of rules, and this is one of those that uses a different set of rules to explain combat, stuff like that. And Voyager in particular, or as it's called, Voyager Tactics, is sort of the game version of this, which is sort of based more on like Fire Emblem and Arknights. It's like the comparison I would make, meaning it's very like tile based. You have to like sort of estimate how many tiles away someone is, and you move using the tiles. And yeah, D&D is also like this, so there is like a very tactical aspect to it, and it's more focused on combat, stuff like that. And it's been through quite a lot of versions. We're currently on version 0.4, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually means that that's been like, this is like the fourth version of the game, because it's not 1.0 yet. 1.0 would imply that it's like in its final workable form that I can actually like, you know, finalize. Here it's still in its testing phase, but there have been multiple major prototypes with different rules that I've been experimenting with over the years. And right now, so right now what we're doing, what this started out initially, what it started out as initially was I wanted to rework the rest system. So in like D&D, you would fight and stuff like that, go through combat, and you will need to rest eventually. So there's like, in D&D there's a short rest and there's a long rest, meaning at a short rest it's like half an hour to an hour in game that you would rest with your party, and that would be like you could like sort of heal yourself or stuff like that. But a long rest is at the end of the day when you sleep, and that's when you sort of kind of fully heal yourself and stuff like that. So if you think of it like in an RPG term, like a actual computer game, RPG is sort of like resting, like setting up camp in the middle of a dungeon is like a short rest, versus a long rest is where you actually have to go to an inn and sleep there, which will like actually fully restore your health and stuff like that. But of course, many different games have different rest systems, and so for Voyager, it started out as me trying to figure out how to tweak the rest system, because it's a bit not very fleshed out, because the rest system as it stands right now, because part of the reason there is a rest system in games like this is because of healing, and healing is a major aspect of games like this, because healing is sort of your hard limit to how much you can do, right? Because if you don't have enough health, then you can't fight, you can't do a lot of things. So eventually you will need to heal yourself or rest in order to have enough health in order to continue doing various things comfortably, right? So but then how healing is normally limited is through stuff like mana, potions, stuff like that. In D&D, it's limited by potions. So potions are rare in D&D, meaning like they're very expensive and rare. So like you only can really like drink one, and it's sort of like it costs a lot, and it doesn't restore that much either. And healing with a spell would consume a spell slot, which is basically like mana in D&D, but basically it's like a limited magic resource. So that is sort of how Dungeons and Dragons limits how much you can heal through like mana and through potion costs. But here there hasn't been such a limit, simply because I'm not really a big fan of overly like limiting aspects such as like mana and stuff like that. I prefer something that doesn't have such a hard cost to it. But that led to the problem of there being like too much healing potentially, because it doesn't have like the traditional mana cost of healing. So obviously, what's to stop you from, when you finish fighting, all you have to do is just like spam a few healing spells which have no mana cost, and you're already back to full health. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It always depends on the kind of game you want to play. So obviously, if you want to play like a more like a casual game, or even something that is not that focused on like the survival aspects of like adventuring, then fully healing after each combat encounter is not a wrong concept. Actually, it's kind of fine by itself, but I did feel that rest is quite important, not just I guess to limit how much the players can accomplish, but also because rest is important for roleplay. Because if you're just fighting all day, it's just going to be like fast paced and full of action all the time. But from what I've experienced playing like tabletop games, you kind of do want to have slow moments in during your adventure to just sort of like sit back, interact with your party members, or sort of like plan your next strategy before you go into the next fight. So rest periods are quite important in this game, at least, to sort of incentivize that sort of player behavior. So which is why I was reworking the rest system in order to try to elegantly solve this problem. But that's not what we're talking about today, because that's just where it started. Because it started with me trying to figure out the rest system, but it eventually led to me having to figure out everything else. Because obviously when you're thinking about the rest system, how do you limit healing, then you have to talk about stuff like mana generation, stuff like that. And so that eventually led me to almost kind of reworking the base action economy of this game itself. Meaning if you're already like a player or you're part of the Voyager the Tabletop Discord server, which you'll find in the description, you will know already how the game plays. So expect that there will be quite a few changes to the system, which of course I would appreciate if you guys test it out, because the more we test it out, the more we can get it closer to an actual 1.0 release. But so right now you're actually going to like watch me overhaul a lot of things. So, and of course, if you still prefer like the old version that we're playing now, there's the old PDF there. But right now I'm going to try and test out what is essentially going to be possibly Voyager version 0.5, which, because I think some of the changes I'm outlining here will be quite significant enough to warrant like a significant version change. Am I going to make short videos around Voyager, like how Remnants is formatted? Perhaps. It's not a huge priority because of obviously like Remnants and Project Wand. I do intend to make videos for like actual like character based videos, but for Voyager I'm more focused on the game aspect of it. So I think once the game itself is in like a stable spot with like the actual 1.0 release, then I can probably start actually thinking about videos and an actual story and stuff like that. So I'm going to jump into Clip Studio because I will need to explain, maybe not Clip Studio yet, I'll need to explain stuff like how the action economy works for the new viewers, so that I can explain what are the actual changes. So what I have open right now is the PDF, well not the PDF, it's the book, the rule book for Voyager Tactics. It should be, yeah. And this is basically where I work and do all the rules. And so far, what I'm using is the software Scribus, and Scribus is basically a desktop publishing software. You use it to, it's free, and you use it to basically like format books and stuff like that. Because before this, I was using stuff like Google Docs, stuff like that, which was not efficient after a point to do actual like book formatting and like adding pictures. So I had to like download Scribus and learn how to use it. There's a very useful tutorial on YouTube to learn how to use it, and eventually it became like its own book. So I'm just going to skim through because I want to hit straight to the action economy. So to give a very quick overview of how the action here works, let me see, can I pull up, okay, never mind. So there's a thing called action dice in this game. So if you only know like Dungeons and Dragons, then it's a very different system. So try not to think of it like, oh, how does this connect to like this concept in D&D? No, it's a very different thing. So try to like think of it as its own rules. But you have 5 different actions you can do during combat. and I'm talking about like the old version here. So you have your move action, which is used to move. You have save, which is used to defend. You have hit, which is used to fight in melee. Aim, to fight in range. And cast, to cast magic. And these are like the 5 main actions that you use in this game, because in D&D you have the attributes like you have strength, constitution, dexterity, wisdom, and those are like the attributes you use in combat, right? Like if you're using a melee attack, you would like calculate it based on your strength. But what I wanted to do with Voyager is I wanted a system that didn't really have attributes or stats tied to your character, because from my experience playing it, I didn't like how every time I was playing and I needed to know how much damage I did, I always had to check like my character sheet and see like, okay, this is like a +3, so I have to like add this plus that. So it's quite time consuming and gets in the way of the action. So eventually I had created a system that forgoes those types of attributes altogether, and instead has the actions you do be represented as your so-called attributes, which is the 5 main basic actions you can accomplish during combat. And each of these has a dice associated with it. So you would, whenever you perform one of these basic actions, you would roll a die to determine how effective it is. So in D&D you have like an actual move speed. So like in D&D there's like 30, normally it's like 30 foot move speed or 25 feet, and that's what like determines how many tiles you can move, and that's like its own stat. But here the move action, you have to roll for it by default. So let's say I take this D8, which is a 8-sided die, and I roll a 3. So this means when I roll a 3 and I choose to move and I roll a 3, that means I can move 3 tiles, and that's like one action, right? So if I want to, so that means I can only move a maximum of 3 tiles for that action. If I want to move further, because I'm too far away, I have to roll it again. I have to spend another action to roll again, and then I got 8, so that means I can move an additional 8 tiles. And then for save, it's used for like defense, and for hit. So hit, obviously, instead of like what you would find in D&D where you have to roll a d20 to first to see whether you attack or not, whether you actually miss or hit the guy, and then determining your damage based on like your weapon, because even the weapons have like different stats, and your modifier based on your attribute. Here you just roll your hit and it determines how much damage you deal. So if I am right next to a guy and I roll to hit and I roll 2, that means I deal 2 damage. And aim is the same, but it's a bit more complex, because aim determines your range as well as the damage you deal. So let's say you are 4 tiles away from an enemy. That means if you want to actually hit the enemy, you have to roll a 4 or higher in order to hit them. If you roll lower than a 4, it is considered a miss. So if I'm, let's say, 4 tiles away and I roll to aim and I do get 4, that means I do actually hit them and I deal 4 damage. So I deal 4 damage, and if I roll higher, so if I roll a 1, that means I miss, so I deal no damage. If I roll a 7, that means, and they're within 4 tiles range, that means I hit them and deal 7 damage. I might change it because we know we're sort of like revising the system right now, so it might be 7 damage, or it might be 7 minus 4, so like 3. No, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, okay, 7 damage. I forget what I said. But yeah, that's sort of like the basic idea behind the actions here, is that you would roll for everything basically. There's no modifier or like number you need to memorize. It's just that the moment you have to take a turn and choose one of the basic actions, you just roll for it, and then it will determine whether it succeeds or not, or how much you can do it. So, and like the difference between aim and hit is that aiming can miss, but hitting in melee is always automatically hits unless they block or dodge. But basically, like where aiming, you have to roll high enough or you don't hit at all. Hit is just to determine the scale of damage. So 1 is always 1 damage, stuff like that. But you have to be within 1 tile of the person. So Diego, critical. So far, the critical system here is just whenever you roll maximum on the die. So let's say if I'm using a D8, then I have to roll an 8 to it for it to be a critical, and then there's like certain abilities and stuff that sort of happen when you roll a critical, stuff like that. But that's the basics of the action system, and then I have to elaborate on action loadouts. So an action loadout is basically when you create your character. Let me put it up here. So when you create a character, you have a certain loadout or move set that determines like the kind of actions you can do. So if I were to, let's say, move to a different class altogether, let's see. So if let's say I want to go to this class or this venture, that's what they call here. So this is the air venture, which is one of the combat based classes or ventures here, and this is their loadout. So their loadout looks like this, and as you can see, it has the different action dice. It has 2 move dice, 2 hit, 2 aim, 2 save, and 2 cast, meaning it has 2 of each type of action, which makes them like more of a jack of all trades. So and if I look at like a different class, say an arms master, so an arms master is sort of basically like a melee fighter, like a samurai type of class. You would see that their loadout is different because they have 4 hit dice, 2 move, 2 save, and only 1 of aim and cast. So their range capability is not so good, and their magic is not so good, but their melee capability is stronger. So each class has its own loadout that determines the types of actions they're proficient in. So in Voyager version 0.4, how this worked was that when you took your turn, let me try to find the page. So when you took your turn, you have 3 actions you can take, right? So if you're familiar with Pathfinder has like 3 actions you can use. But if I'm using D&D terms, you know how in D&D you have your movement, you have your action, bonus action, and reaction. In Pathfinder, and to an extent this as well, is sort of just like they're all just classified as actions. So if you want to move, it takes an action. If you want to cast a spell, it takes 1 action. If you want to use a bonus action or a reaction, that also counts as an action. And it's just easier overall to work with, rather than sort of compartmentalizing which is a bonus action or not. It's just everything is an action depending on what you use. So let's see. So the types of actions you can take 3 actions during your turn. So what you would normally do, let's say in D&D, is you would normally want to move, you want to attack, and maybe cast a spell or reaction or something like that, and then that's your turn. So in Voyager terms, if you want to do that, you have 3 actions. You would spend 1 action to move, you would spend 1 action to attack, and you can use your 3rd action to attack if you wanted, or to cast magic, or you could wait, and if something happened outside of your turn, you can spend your 3rd action to make a reaction, which allows you to react to something that is happening outside of your turn, so that you can, do like tag team attacks with your allies and stuff like that. So how it worked back then in version 0.4 is based on your loadout. So I'm gonna pull up Clip Studio. Okay, so I'm in Clip Studio right now, and this is the Air's loadouts. So I'm just gonna pull them into this canvas here. Right. Oh, so we have the Air's action loadout here. So turn 1. So during turn 1, I have 3 actions, right? Which I can use for anything. Oh, that is not supposed to be in that layer. Okay. Alright. So during turn 1, I have 3 actions. And based on my loadout, which is, we're using this one, if I wanted to move, attack, and shoot, let's say. So action 1 is, so during our first turn, we want to move. There's 1, 2, we want to attack in melee, and 3, we wanted to shoot. So in 0.4, what you would do is you would look at your loadout and you would cross out what actions would require that. So if I were started with my movement, I would cross out 1 move die, then roll it, see how much I get. This is 1 tile, so I can move 1 tile. And then if I wanted to attack, I would cross out the hit die, roll to see the damage, and then for my 3rd action, I wanted to shoot another enemy that's far away. So then I would cross out my aim hit die, and then shoot them. So during each turn, you would normally spend about 3 of these action dice during combat. Of course, there's like other stuff that you could do that would spend more dice, depending. These are like more complex actions or attacks, but we're just gonna talk about the basics here. So this is turn 1. So turn 2. Turn 2 rolls around, and we want to move again. So then I have to cross out another move, and then I wanted to attack and cast magic. So then I have to cross out these from my loadout. And then, so what's happening here is that the more I spend for my loadout, the less available actions I have towards later, meaning I've already used up both of my hit actions during turn 2. So meaning when turn 3 comes around, I do not actually have any hit actions left, meaning I cannot make any more melee attacks, but I do still have one aim action left, which I can use to shoot if I choose to do so, and I have like one magic action die which I can use to cast magic. But let's say before turn 3, during turn 2, you still had actions remaining and an enemy decides to attack you, you can use your save dice to sort of reduce the damage or try to negate it entirely. So of course that would also spend them from your loadout. So then eventually, when you spent all of the dice from your loadout, which will take about maybe 3 to 4 turns typically, then by the next turn or the next round, it would refresh. So after you have spent all of your action dice here, then the next turn it would refresh, and then you have a full loadout again that you can spend to use your actions and all that. So this was the system in version 0.4, and I think people did generally like it. I think what I liked particularly about this system is that it's very, I would say it's quite visually intuitive to understand, meaning if you have a move action, you would roll to see how far you go. If you have a hit action, you would roll to see how much damage you deal. There's a certain straightforwardness to what those actions do and how you would roll to determine the outcome, because instead of rolling to see like if you hit or miss, or rolling to see certain things, it's just like you have 5 different actions during combat, so which do you choose to use and what do you roll to determine the outcome. But what I've noticed from the playtesting, which admittedly is not a lot, we don't have that many players, but just from what the players so far have told me, is that that it can be quite I guess limiting, because eventually as you go into the turn, you would have less and less options during combat, so you sort of less options, during combat, and that's not a bad thing, because it does encourage like a sense of strategy and resource management. Like, okay, if I use up all of my melee attacks now, then I won't have any to use later, so maybe I should just attack once and maybe hope that my ally can finish them off. So just the fact that you can't do everything you want within a turn, hopefully incentivize like working with your allies to sort of work together to take down the same enemy, things like that. But from what I found, players, because there's like certain systems that allow you to refresh or reset your loadout entirely, meaning like if you ended your turn a certain way, or if you like cash in certain dice, or like you basically, it's like sort of like if you're like sort of like left with a turn that you have no dice left that you want to use, you can sort of like reserve them or discard them basically, and that would allow you to automatically reset your loadout. And from what I observed, a lot of players were just doing that instead. Whenever they had dice that they didn't want to use, they would just like find ways to reset or to like discard or use up or reserve those unnecessary dice as soon as possible, so that they can actually use the ones they want, which is kind of part of the intended design. But I noticed that it may not necessarily be fun, because I do like the strategic aspect of it, but it does kind of encourage a certain type of player behavior that that is not necessarily like what I intended. So now, and also the fact that imagine you are playing this like physically, like at a table, like you are at a D&D table with some friends, and you're actually playing the game. And let's say you have a character sheet, and your character sheet would have like this card that will have your loadout. One of my concerns while making this was that it would be hard to keep track of your loadout, because you know, if it was like a video game, obviously a video game would automatically see which actions you have used already and which it wouldn't. It will keep track of that. But of course in real life you have to do all of that shit yourself. So what I foresaw being a problem, which I don't really hear the players bringing up, but I knew would be an issue, is that if you're playing it physically, you would have to like manually, like maybe using a pencil or a Sharpie or like a marker, like an erasable marker, or just memorizing like which ones you used and didn't. So let's say if I'm like at this table and I have like a pencil or anything like that, I have to like cross out every time I take a turn which ones I used, and then every time a new turn starts I have to check again and then see which ones, and then by the time I reset it, I have to take the eraser and erase all of it again, which of course will wear out the paper and all that. So I can foresee that in the long term it can be quite cumbersome to play, because you have to keep using a pencil or whatever to strike out the action options on your card, and then keep erasing them to reset it. So that was something I noticed was not optimal with this version of the action system. But I did like the general idea of it, of rolling to determine the action. But I sort of let it sit for a few months, and until today, where while brainstorming stuff about like the rest system and how to handle like healing and stuff like that, that it gave me an idea of how to maybe revise and rework the action system, which is finally the point that I wanted to reach, because that's what I wanted to work on today. So if I were to explain it, I have the notes somewhere. Alright, so okay, so if you are like, if you're familiar already with the Voyager system, like if you're part of the server, try to unlearn a bit of what I've already talked about, namely about the action loadout system, and I'm going to try to explain it to you in like new terms. So right now, what we have with the classes, the ventures in this system, is that each class has its own action loadout. Reworking the entire action system? Bigger change than I thought, but I'm hyped for it. Thank you. What's the punctuation? Yeah, this, I mean, of course we're gonna test it out. I'm gonna like work on this for the next few days and hopefully get a workable PDF out soon. But we're gonna like, I literally today have just like thought about it, so we're gonna basically work on it in its very rough stages. But and Letters has been very supportive of the system, of the world, and just like commissioning the art of the characters and all that. So I'm very thankful for their help. So what we want to do here is explained to the new viewers and the old like people familiar with the system how these changes are going to take place. So with the current system version 0.4, the classes, the adventures here, each have their own set loadout. So if you picked this air venture, this is the loadout you have to deal with, right? This is fixed, meaning you can only ever have 2 move, 2 aim, all 2 of each. If you choose to take the Gamblade venture, is sort of, it's the same, but basically based on the venture you chose, this one has like more. The Jet Core Trooper has 4 move dice and 3 aim dice because they are more mobile and they use like a rifle to shoot. So that is reflected in their loadout. And I did like the general idea of the loadout because it gives you a very quick impression of what the class does at a glance. Because if you're already familiar enough with what the action dice are, so like movement, attacking, melee, range, defense, if you just look at what a class is and what their action loadout is, you can already sort of guess what sort of actions they would prefer. So if I look at the Jet Core Trooper, which is like a very it's a jetpack soldier, like something you would see from Titanfall essentially, or Advanced Warfare, Call of Duty. You would see a loadout like this and see, okay, it has 4 move dice. That means it's probably going to be used for like the jetpack and like moving around doing parkour stuff. And it has a lot of aim dice, meaning it's going to be a lot of shooting more than melee. Or if I go to a different venture like the Arms Master, which is the samurai class, then you have like all the hit dice, which, okay, I can tell that this is a very melee focused class. So that's what I liked about the loadout system for the ventures, was because you could look at it and you can already tell what the class was going to be about when you choose it. But what we're going to adjust today is the idea that during character creation, you would be able to make your own loadout, right? So let's say character creation, if you're thinking, like your game master asks you, what kind of character are you thinking? And then you say, I want to play like a barbarian or someone who's very like focused on melee combat, right? So then if you're making your own loadout, you would pick, okay, I'm gonna put like more hit dice, I'm gonna put maybe more save dice so that I can be more tanky and defensive when I need to be. Or if I say, I want to be more of a fast mobile character, then I would put more of the move dice into my loadout. And your loadout is always 10 dice, okay? So it's 10 dice total, so you have to choose like in what combination it has to be in, but it cannot be more than 10. So that's why all the ventures have 10 dice in their loadout. But so the idea is to allow the player the freedom to make their own loadout. But then the ventures that we see here is sort of like the recommended loadout that they would use. So so this is more a case of a different change of mindset. Nothing has changed rules wise yet, but the first change is that I'm proposing right now for version 0.5 is that at character creation you would be able to make your own loadout to determine what sort of actions your character focuses on. But when you choose your class, your venture, your venture recommends you this type of loadout because the abilities they use or the traits that they have or their play style, how they play, how they address situations, or the fantasy of playing that class, it recommends that you take this type of loadout so that you have the most optimal time playing this type of character. So if I wanted to make like an arms master who knows a bit more magic, I can choose to replace one of the hit dice and replace it with a cast die. So that will leave me with 3 hit die and 2 cast die. So I have the freedom, I have the freedom to actually change the loadout to fit the type of character I want to make. But the venture is just like what we should read here is more like a recommendation of how to build your loadout. So that's the first point. And so the second point, and this is like going into the actual changes, is next I wanted to address the problem that I stated just now about how when you actually play with the loadout, you have to like cross out what you can use and what you can't use and erase it. Basically your loadout is almost like a resource, right? It's almost like let me pull up the Clip Studio. When you have the loadout in front of you, let's say this card, because I'm imagining you would print out this card and you have it out in front of you. When you have your card out, you would treat it almost like a resource, because you would spend dice from your loadout and play them, and then after that you will not be able to use them until you reset the loadout. So your loadout here is like a resource, but right now what I want to change about the action loadout is more like I'm not sure the word I'll use for it, but let me explain what I had in mind. So I have to go in a bit of detail regarding how abilities work. So each venture has different abilities that they can use. So let me find one that I can use an example. I'll probably go to the key bearer. So the key bearer is sort of like the magic archer class. That's sort of their main thing, and they have like a lot of magic spell based abilities, so that'd be easier to explain. So let's look at this one here, which is Infuse Rune, which is one of their starting abilities. And Infuse Rune is basically one cast action. So you would use up one of the cast dice to cast it, and you would basically draw a rune on the ground or somewhere that will explode when someone walks over it. So that's one of the abilities. So how it works currently is that, you know, if you want to use this ability, you would go to your loadout and you will cross out one of the cast dice. I'm gonna cast Infuse Rune. I'll cross out the cast dice from my loadout, and then I would cast a spell. And then if I cast more and more of it, then eventually I'm gonna run out of cast actions, so then I have to wait until I reset my loadout, and then only then I'm able to actually after I reset, I'm able to actually cast magic again. So right now the change is, imagine that what is the best way to explain this? So I know how to imagine it, but explaining it's a different story entirely. So okay, so try to forget everything I said just now, and just look at this. Alright, just look at this loadout here. Now I'm going to pull up two of them, so that it'd be easier to compare the two. So this is the Dreadnought, and the Dreadnought is like a tank class. Alright, so if you want to compare the two, the air is the jack of all trades. So let me just write that down. Jack of all trades venture. And the Dreadnought is like a tank slash bruiser type of unit, because they have armor, they have like this cool gun lance type weapon that they use to fire. So that's why they have 3 save dice, which sort of communicates their tankiness, and 3 aim, which is like their firepower with their cannon. Whereas the air, which is the jack of all trades, they have 2 of everything, so they don't excel at either one exceptionally. So think of it this way: when you look at these two, and let's say I have the ability called okay, wait, before that I'm going to pull up the action dice in general, so that you have a easier time to follow which one is which. Let me quickly find it. Right. Alright. Move, hit, aim. Just for your quick reference while I explain this. So you have the 5 different actions you can do during combat. So these encompass things like movement, melee, range, magic, etc. So think of each of these as basic actions, alright? So whenever I want to perform a basic action, let's say I want to move, I would use I would move, and then I'll roll the dice and see how far I can move. But if I wanted to perform a complex action, and this would be stuff like abilities, right? So anything that's more complex than just running, hitting stuff with your weapon like a basic attack, or shooting something is considered complex, meaning it's like a ability or a combat technique. What would happen is there is now a greater requirement to do so. So let me visually represent it here. So let's say there is an ability called let's say wall run, right? So if I'm next to a wall, and I want to like be able to, let's say there's a chasm, right? There's a big hole in front of me, but there's also a wall next to it. So normally I would not be able to jump across it, but if I have like the wall run ability, I can just run along the wall, like parkour style, and then or Prince of Persia style, and then I'll land the other side. But it's an ability I have to use, so that counts as like a movement ability. And to perform wall run, I need to have at least 2 move, because so it's not a cost, but it's more like a requirement. You need to have, think of it almost like a stat, right? So you need to have like a move level of 2, right? So if you're move level of 1, that means you're kind of slow. If you move level of 2, you're relatively mobile. If you move level of 3, then you're very much mobile, things like that. So let's say if you're going to read like the ability description of wall run, it would say that it requires move level 2 or move rank 2 or whatever it's called. So then if I look at the loadouts we have now, if I were to play as the air class, I would be able to perform wall run because I have 2 move. But if I play as the Dreadnought, I only have 1 move. So that means I cannot actually perform wall run because I'm heavily armored, I have all this shit on top of me. I cannot actually do that. So now it's sort of like your loadout is sort of communicating what sort of abilities you can or cannot do, basically. So if I were to use like another example, let's say if I were to use the ability called, let me just move all this shit. Let's say if I were to use the ability called Fireball, which is like a fire attack, and this is like a magical fire attack, right? So copy this, copy that, copy that. Alright, so if I wanted to perform Fireball, it has a cast requirement of 2, right? So let's imagine you have like a list of spells or whatever that you want to use, and you see Fireball, and Fireball has a requirement of cast 2. So if I were to look at my venture, a Dreadnought would not be able to cast Fireball, but an air would be able to. So, and then let's say we have another ability called, let's say Cannon Fire. So if I have an ability called Cannon Fire, this is, sorry, there's a dog outside, my neighbor's dog. If we have this ability called Cannon Fire, which is a powerful cannon blast, basically, and the requirement is 3 aim dice, right? So let's just pretend these are 3 aim. So I need to have at least aim 3 in order to learn the cannon fire ability. So if I were to look at my loadout, if I was playing an air, I in fact would not be able to learn cannon fire, but if I'm a Dreadnought, I would. So the idea going on here, hey Wolf, Wolf, thanks for showing up. You did so coming late, but you're here now, that's all that matters. But like I was saying, if I were to, so then your choice of venture, like I said, determines what sort of abilities you can learn and not learn, right? So if I'm playing like a very tanky kind of class who focuses on defense and like powerful ranged attacks, I would be able to learn abilities relating to ranged attacks or relating to like tanking stuff, but I would not be able to learn complex magic spells. I would not be able to learn very powerful melee attacks. I would not be able to learn more fancy mobile options. So then of course, if you are a player, if you're a new player, of course I would recommend you would follow one of the preset ventures. But let's say you're an experienced player, right? You've played this game enough times already, and you know like a good amount of abilities, right? And you think, you know what, I want to play an air who knows how to use cannon fire. So I'll just make my own custom loadout you know, I'll just like, you know, whatever, should be like a character sheet or whatever that allows you to do this. But I'm like a player creating my character, and like, you know what, I like cannon fire. It requires 3 aim, so I'm just gonna replace let's say one of my save dice with an aim. So this means my air, I wouldn't even say air at this point, it's like your own custom class, right? But basically like my own character would be able to learn cannon fire and wall run at the same time. So previously, if you were to take one of the preset classes, you would only know wall run and you would only know cannon fire. But if you're making your own custom character, you can choose something that can do cannon fire and wall runs simultaneously. But then there's always a trade-off, because you always have only 10 slots to work with, right? So if you only have 10 slots, that means there's only so many you can put, and there is a requirement. I will say that as a requirement, you must have at least one of every action type, meaning like you can't just have 10 hit actions or like 10 move actions or whatever. You have to have at least one of each, right? So you can't like min-max it like to an extreme extent, but you can, you know, change anything as long as you have one of each. But so if you're making your own custom character, you can, okay, I'm gonna change one of the magic slots. I'm going to focus more on range, so I can learn cannon fire, and I can learn cannon fire because I have 3 aim, and I can learn wall run because I have 2 move. But now I can't learn fireball because I don't have enough cast. So if I want to learn fireball, then maybe I'll keep it at 2 casts, but maybe I will change it so that I remove one of my hit slots, right? So then I only have 1 hit action. But then that means I won't have access to, let's say, you know, whatever cool melee attacks there are, like, you know, like some sort of big swinging attack or multi-hit or like dashing, or like some big samurai iaido slash thing. But basically, every time you're planning your character, you have to plan on, there's always a trade-off, right? So how it balances itself is you have to, there's always a trade-off, because if you want to make a purely magical character, so let me pull up the Invoker. The Invoker is another class. So the Invoker is a very magic focused class. As you can see here, it has 6 cast actions, and then just 1 of each. So if you're going full magic, you have like a lot of tools you can use to perform magic. So let's say if there were an ability, let's say hypothetically there was an ability called you know, whatever you want to call it Nova, you know, like a gigantic explosion around yourself. But the requirement is like you must have at least 4 casts to even attempt casting the spell. So then only someone who has like this Invoker type loadout would be able to cast it. And so you have 6, but now you can't do cannon fire, you can't do wall run, you can't do whatever tempest slash melee thing, and you're not that tanky either, but you're really good at casting magic. So how it balances itself is you always have these 10 slots to work with, but how, you know, you prevent certain classes from overpowering each other is that every ability has a requirement to meet. So fireball has 2, you know, everything like that. So it depends on how you want to build your character, right? So if you want to make them more melee focused, you will give them more hit actions. If you want to make more magic focused, you give them more cast. And if you want to make them balanced, then of course you would give them like sort of an equal number of each. And this is the base, the foundation that I'm going to plan version 0.5 around, because now when you excuse me, can't stay in the live for long, but your art is beautiful and I hope to see more, not just Ruby. Thank you so much, Red Panda. I have a lot of ideas, so that's what these streams are for, so that I can share them with you all. But so what I'm attempting to do here is like, yeah, so it sort of encourages you to so of course if you're a new player or you're not really that interested in like character building, you would just take, you know, one of the presets. Okay, I want to be like tanky and deal a lot of range damage, then of course I would just take the Dreadnought loadout. Or if I want to be a jack of all trades, I would just take the air, and then I can just immediately play it right away, right? But if you're an experienced player, then you actually know what abilities cost, require how much of the action you need, and then you would sort of plan around that. So this is sort of what version 0.5 will be built on. So how that will affect stuff like and of course a change like this is quite major, meaning I will have to rewrite a large portion of the book in order to like rewrite abilities and stuff like that, because obviously like right now if I were to look at the abilities that we have right now, they only have like an action cost. So but now I'm going to have to add like an actual, like you can imagine like if I were to just like take this, let me zoom in. If I were to take something like this, because now I have to like make new assets for this basically, because let me just put all this shit away. Okay. Basically, if I were to do this now, I actually have to like add more assets, because now I have to like, okay, let's say this has a magic cost, so then I would have to actually put next to the thing like how many orbs or whatever, you know, that denotes the requirement to do so. So if you are playing that venture, then basically like, because all these abilities they are tied to certain ventures. So this is the armature. The armature is basically like your knight class, and the armature has 3 save, 2 hit, 2 move, and 2 cast. So they are kind of well rounded, but they're slightly more tanky, and they are slightly they are decent at magic, but they're not good at ranged. So anytime you follow a venture and like look at their abilities, all of their abilities would follow the cost that fits their loadout, meaning like, you know, if I just play this right away and I choose this loadout, then, you know, I will find abilities here that will match the requirements for that class. So, you know, I'm not gonna find an ability here that's gonna cost 2 aim or 3 hit or anything like that. It'll always be like within the cost for that loadout. But why I also like where the direction for this would go is because this makes multi-classing a lot easier. So And what is multiclassing is basically like, if let's say D&D, in D&D you have like, let's say, fighter and wizard, right? And normally what most players would do is that they just play the fighter until max level. But more experienced players, they will mix and match certain classes. So if one player is like a level 6 fighter, another player could be like, okay, I'll take 3 levels of fighter and I'll take 3 levels of wizard. So I want to be like a kind of fighter who can cast magic. So they won't be as effective as a fighter as a level 6 fighter, but because they have level 3 fighter and level 3 wizard, they can do a little bit of both. So that's what multiclassing is. So previously in version 0.4, multiclassing is there were no rules for multiclassing basically. Some people have asked about how would you multiclass in this version, and I gave like very vague rules, like okay, maybe this will cost more XP to like buy this, to learn this ability than normal, or you would do certain things. But here in this baseline for foundation for version 0.5, multiclassing is a lot easier because all you have to do is when you choose your starting venture, you just look at any other venture's abilities and then see if the loadout you have on your character sheet is able to support that ability. So you know, if my loadout says I have cast 3, so I have 3 magic slots, right? I'm gonna look at an ability from, let's say, the wizard. Let's say if I'm using D&D terms, if I'm gonna look at the wizard, okay, fireball is 2 magic slots, I can learn that. But then I go to like, let's say the sorcerer class or the druid or the bard, and then I see a magic spell there that I like that the wizard doesn't have, I can just learn it. But I have to make sure that it meets the requirement. So I have to make sure, you know, if there's like a bard spell or a druid spell like create 3 or whatever that has a cost of 3 magic, that you need to have at least 3 magic to be able to cast it, then all I have to do is make sure that my loadout can even accommodate it. So this makes learning different abilities from different classes a lot easier, because all you have to do is make sure that the 10 dice that you have meets the requirement to actually learn that ability. And that is sort of where I'm at right now, and I'm not sure where to go from there, because prior to the stream that was sort of what I was thinking about and writing down. So like I'm gonna shift it to Obsidian. So Obsidian is another app that I use. It's basically like, it's like a project management type of app that I use to organize notes and information. When I work on something a bit more detailed, I would like to give you guys a tour of Obsidian, because it has a lot of very useful tools, especially if you're like a writer or anyone who's like making projects. Obsidian is very useful because it's almost like your own Google Drive or Google Docs that you have on your own PC, because you can make new notes. Like you can like make new notes. You can actually like make them, type them, and organize them by folder. And all of this is offline, meaning you don't have to go on Google Drive or connect to a network. You just download the app and you can just make notes and keep track of them you can even make like reminders and stuff like that. It's a very useful tool that one of the server members, Tillandor, has recommended, and so far I've found it very useful. So this is not where I want to be. So here, what I want to do is so really like an hour or so before the stream, I was just typing out like what I wanted to do with version 0.5. This is not, oh wait, this is it. Like what to do with just taking notes and wondering how to go about reworking the book and all that, and there's still questions that I need to solve to make version 0.5 playable with this new system, because I still haven't like figured out stuff like, you know, the other questions that I posed just now, like how would you tackle healing, how would you tackle rest and stuff like that. So with the new changes in mind, I have to also implement these other aspects that were still lacking in the older versions. So so for like healing and all that, is it like temporary, or is it can you only heal while resting? How would I limit, you know, magic healing spells so that you don't just do it infinitely, stuff like that. So that's kind of where I'm at now. However, that's not what so I will need time off stream to actually figure it out, but I guess what I can do right now, let me see if I can actually do it today, because initially I was planning to do some stuff for enemy design, because in version 0.4, the enemy list is very sparse. Like it's just like 4 pages essentially, 4 pages of like example enemies and how you would create them for your games, and I wanted to flesh them out. So what I did was this was inspired by Dungeon Coach, which is a D&D YouTuber, where he created like this sort of system for making enemies for D&D, and what he did was sort of make like templates for enemies. So like if you have like a ranged enemy, you follow this template to make them. If you have like a boss or tanky type enemy, you would use this template, and I like that idea, so I wanted to kind of implement that sort of enemy template system into this game. But that was until I, you know, came across all the changes for you know, this action system in 0.5. So now I'm faced with that as a conundrum. So I might actually have to put off doing this until I am able to actually flesh out the system more and figure out how then to implement like the enemies and stuff into it, because there's quite a lot of work waiting ahead if I were to do that. Let's see. So right now, the work I can already foresee happening is I obviously have to rewrite a lot of the abilities. I have to add in like, I have to sort of estimate, you know, what is the action cost of it, and I still haven't figured out like how that would affect the action economy. So yeah, that's another point I wanted to make. So let me go back to clip. So what I wanted to do was, so to sort of explain back how like the action and stuff. So if I were to say, you know, per turn, 3 actions, right? So, and right now, since it's in like that kind of brainstorming stage, I could do a different changes to the action system as well. But you know, you have 3 actions, and actually no, not here. You have 3 actions, and you can perform. So you know, you have your turn, and you have 3 actions per turn. So you have basic actions, which you can spend 1 action to do any one of the 5 basic actions, which is to move, or to hit someone, or to with a basic attack, or shoot with a basic attack, or cast like a basic magic spell. But then, if let's say you wanted to do something more complex, like let's say fireball, that might cost 2 actions, let's say, right? So keep in mind that this is not the action cost, right? Because sometimes let's say for this cannon fire, which requires 3, does not necessarily mean you need 3 actions to do it. It just means that you need like a high enough aim stat, quote unquote stat, in order to use it. But it can be like 2 actions or 1 action to do it. So I still need to figure that out, because now it has to go into the sort of action economy, because now, but at least hopefully now, it sort of solved a bit of the problem regarding like, you know, how people were finding ways to, they were like lacking options whenever they used up their actions during the turn, and then they have to like find ways to reset their loadout. But now it's more like the loadout is like your reference to refer to as you know, what kind of actions can I take, stuff like that. And then action wise, I have to figure out what to do from here, because from here I'll need to know, you know, from here like how do I change the different abilities to adapt to this new change. So let's say let's say Pillar of Magic, and Pillar of Magic is basically like an elemental pillar ability where you create like either a pillar of fire or ice or wind or anything like that in like a tile, right? So that might be, obviously that would have a cost of like maybe 1 or 2 actions. I would say 1 action. I think I would prefer if most combat still requires like just 1 action to perform, because I do want that you should be able to have be able to do multiple actions in a turn. So of course you always need at least 1 action to move, because you'll be moving around a lot just to like position yourself. So which is why, you know, D&D moving is not considered part of your action, but other games like Pathfinder, moving is like consumes one of your actions. So of course moving is assumed to be part of your 3 actions, and then you're obviously going to do some kind of attack, which is 1 action, and then you might want to save the 3rd one whenever you want to do like a reaction kind of thing, or you know, something you want to hold on to. So basically like 3 things: to move, to perform a main combat action, and to react to something. So I do want to give the player the freedom to be able to do those 3 things during their turn at any given time. So even most complex spells, I think, would only cost 1 action to do. but as long as you meet the required stat or whatever for it. And of course, if I were to test it around, maybe I could change it so that you have 4 actions per turn instead of 3. I know that Dungeon Coach, the YouTuber I mentioned, he's also making his own tabletop RPG. It's called DC20. I've been following his work for quite a while, but he's been doing stuff like streaming about the game and explaining how it works and making videos about it, which is also kind of what I'm doing now, sort of as taking a page from his book, I guess. But what he did for his system is very similar, but it has 4 action points. So what Dungeon Coach did is he had 4 action points that you would use. So to move is 1 action point, but what he did was attacking or any major action is 2 action points, right? I believe that was the case. It might have been just for spells or whatever, or attacking might have been 1 action point, but basically it's like you had 4 action points and you would spend 2 in order to do something more complex. And that helps balance it out because obviously 2 will cost more, but it has better effects. And then if you move 1, and then to perform a complex spell or whatever, 2 actions, and then you have like a 4th in case you want to react or do anything with that. But right now, if I were to just keep it to 3, then it would just be 1 action for any type of complex actions, and only like the really powerful abilities would cost 2, which would take up most of your turn. But that's sort of where my head's at right now. I do want to keep today's stream relatively short because I want it to be able to be watchable by folks who follow the Voyager RPG's development, to be able to sort of leave it in the background and sort of learn about the changes I'm making. So this stream will be a bit shorter. We normally stream for like 2 hours, but I think I'm gonna end it here because I also need to like spend time off stream to like work out all the different changes I need to make this. So I will conclude it here and let it all marinate in my mind what to do about all these changes. But if you found all this interesting, or if all this was way too complex but you're interested in like the Voyager world or setting, you found maybe the art nice or the characters cool, then feel free to join the SWITCHBACK Tabletop Discord server, which is in the description. So that's different from my main channel server. The Tabletop server is where I post like my Voyager stuff or other game RPG stuff that I've done, and also in the description is a link to the itch.io, and that's where I actually post the games for you to test out. Our Spell is Steel is there as well, but if you want to like play and test Voyager current version 0.4, you can head down to the link and you will be able to download the PDF and actually read through and see the rules, or just like look at the nice art and all like the different characters and abilities that they have. You're free to do that and download the PDF. But beyond that, tomorrow we'll see if tomorrow I'll stream Voyager again, if I have more to share, like once I figure out more of what to do here. But if not, I'll probably return to streaming Project 1, but I hope to at least have enough content to like maybe stream Voyager again, so that it's like, you know, there's like a theme for this week, which is just Voyager stuff. But besides that, Thank you all for coming. I hope to work more on Voyager and hopefully work on this RPG stuff and figure out version 0.5 and have it out hopefully within the next few weeks so that players can start playtesting it immediately. But besides that, I thank you all for coming. Sorry that there wasn't a stream last week, but we should be back on schedule now, and I'll see you next time.